Sign your house over to your brother. Those were the words my mother said to me in front of 40 guests at her anniversary party.
I thought she was humiliating me.
I was wrong. When I opened the folder, I discovered someone had already forged my signature, investigated my mortgage, and planned to turn my $612,000 home into cash. Then my brother pulled me aside and whispered, "Don't trust Mom. There are things in those papers you haven't seen." But the biggest shock came later, when I discovered my mother's plan wasn't really about my house at all. Someone had been using my family for years, and my father's final secret was hidden inside an old storage unit. If you were in my position, would you sign to protect your family or walk away? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe for more stories where the truth always comes out. The first thing my mother said when she handed me the folder was, "Sign your house over to your brother." She said it loudly enough for every person at the anniversary dinner to hear. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. I looked at the folder in my hands, then at my mother, Mavra Voss, who was standing beside the dessert table with the calm expression she always wore when she believed she had arranged everything perfectly. Then I looked at my brother. Oren would not meet my eyes. That was when I knew this was not an ordinary family argument. My name is Ilera Voss. I'm 34, a structural engineer, and I have always been the practical one in my family. I work long hours, keep careful records, pay my bills early, and think twice before making major decisions. My younger brother, Oren, is 29. He has had a harder time keeping his life stable. Over the years, he has changed jobs several times, moved between apartments, and made financial decisions that my mother always described as temporary mistakes. Whenever Oren needed help, she found a reason to defend him. Whenever I needed help, she reminded me that I was capable of handling things myself. I had learned to accept that difference. What I had not expected was for her to use it against me in front of 40 people. The anniversary party had started at 6:30 that evening at my parents' house in Westbridge. My father, Aldrin, had been married to my mother for 35 years. He was 65 and usually quiet during family arguments. That night, however, he was nowhere near the dining room. He had been called away earlier because one of his old friends had suffered a medical emergency. My mother had told everyone not to worry. "We'll celebrate properly when Aldrin gets back." I had believed her. I arrived carrying a bottle of wine and a wrapped gift. My mother kissed my cheek at the door, then immediately pointed toward the living room. "Put that over there, sweetheart. How are you?"
Busy.
"Everyone is already here." She smiled, but something about her expression seemed forced. At the time, I dismissed it. My mother was always particular about family events. She liked everything arranged according to her plan: the seating, the food, the photographs, even when people were allowed to leave. The dining room looked exactly like something she would organize. White tablecloths covered 3 long tables. Gold ribbons were tied around the chairs. A framed wedding photograph of my parents stood beside the anniversary cake. Their names and wedding date were printed on a small card beneath it. I remember thinking that the room looked expensive. Later, I would realize that some of the money spent on that party had come from an account I had never heard of. But at that moment, I knew nothing. I spent the first hour talking to relatives. My Aunt Leora asked about my work. My cousin Tavin complained about traffic. An old neighbor named Muriel told me she had not seen me since Christmas. Everything felt normal. Then Oren arrived. He was 40 minutes late. He walked through the front door, wearing a dark navy suit. I had never seen the suit before. My mother immediately went to him. "There he is." She hugged him tightly. "You look wonderful." Oren smiled. "Thanks, Mom." She adjusted his collar. Then she looked across the room at me. For just a moment our eyes met.
He looked away.
I noticed. I had known my brother my entire life. I knew when he was embarrassed, angry, nervous, or hiding something. That night he was hiding something. Dinner began at 7:30. My father still had not returned. My mother kept checking her phone. At 8:15, she stood and tapped her glass. Everyone became quiet. "I want to thank all of you for being here," she said. 35 years is a long time. Everyone applauded. I smiled. Then she continued. And because family is the most important thing in the world, I have one more announcement. She looked directly at Oren. He lowered his head. Then she walked toward the dessert table. She picked up a brown folder. I thought it contained photographs. Maybe old letters. Maybe something sentimental about my parents' marriage. She walked toward me. Ilira, come here. I stood. She placed the folder in my hands. Open it. I laughed nervously. What is this? You'll see. I opened it. The first page had my full legal name. The second page had the address of my house. I stopped smiling. My house was a 3-bedroom property on Hawthorne Lane. I had bought it 8 years earlier. No inheritance. No family gift. No money from my parents. I had saved for 7 years, worked overtime, and put nearly everything I had into the down payment. I still remembered the day I received the keys. I had stood inside the empty living room and called my father. He had said, "You did this yourself." That sentence had stayed with me. Now my mother was pointing at a document describing the transfer of that same property. I turned the page. My brother's name appeared as the proposed new owner. I looked at my mother. What is this? She smiled. Your brother needs a proper home. I thought she was joking. Oren already has an apartment. He needs something permanent. Then buy him something. A few people at the table shifted uncomfortably. My mother lowered her voice. Don't make a scene. I stared at her. You just handed me paperwork transferring my house to Oren. Because you're the responsible one. I looked at the document again. There was a section describing the transfer as a voluntary family settlement. I had never agreed to a family settlement. I had never discussed selling my property. I had never hired anyone to transfer it. And then I saw the date. The paperwork had been prepared more than a month earlier. I looked up. Why was this prepared 6 weeks ago? My mother's expression changed. Only slightly.
But I saw it.
So, everything would be ready. Ready for what? For tonight. I glanced at Oren. He was staring at his plate. Did you know about this?
He finally looked at me.
I knew Mom wanted to talk to you. That's not what I asked. He swallowed. I knew there were papers. My chest tightened. And you didn't tell me? I didn't think you'd understand. I almost laughed. Understand what? My mother stepped between us. This isn't about blame. It's about helping your brother. Then why does it involve my house? Because you don't need it as much as he does. That sentence hurt more than I expected. I had never asked my family to recognize how hard I had worked, but I had expected them to recognize that the house was mine. I turned another page. There was a financial statement attached to the transfer. It claimed I had received a substantial amount of money from my parents years earlier and that this transfer was part of an agreement to settle an old family obligation. I looked at my mother. This is false. She said nothing. I never received this money. You don't remember. I remember my finances very well. You were younger. I have my bank records. Her smile disappeared. A relative near the window whispered something to her husband. My mother leaned toward me. Sign tonight, and we can avoid embarrassing everyone. I stared at her. You are the one doing this in front of 40 people. Her face hardened. Your brother has been struggling. Then help him. We have. With what? She did not answer. I looked at Oren. How much do you owe? His face went pale. My mother immediately interrupted. That's private. Then why is my house being used to solve it? Oren stood. Ilira, please.
No.
Tell me. He looked at her mother. She gave him a warning glance. That was the second moment I realized he was afraid of her. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Afraid. I closed the folder. I'm not signing anything. My mother reached for it. Give me the papers. I pulled them away.
No.
Her voice dropped. You don't know what you're refusing. Then explain it. She did not. Instead, she said, if you walk out now, don't expect this family to protect you when things get worse. I stared at her. What does that mean? She turned away. The conversation was over as far as she was concerned. I picked up my purse. I think I'm leaving. Nobody stopped me. I walked through the living room and toward the front door. The anniversary decorations were still hanging from the walls. The music was still playing softly. People were pretending not to watch. As I stepped onto the porch, Oren followed me. Ilira. I turned. He looked terrified. What? Don't take that folder home. I held it against my side. Why? He glanced through the doorway toward our mother. Then he lowered his voice. Because that's not the only document. My heart started beating faster. What do you mean? He opened his mouth. Before he could answer, my mother called his name from inside. Oren immediately stepped back. I have to go. Oren. He looked at me. For the first time that evening, he looked like my little brother again instead of the man who had apparently agreed to take my house. Please don't trust anything Mom tells you tonight. Then he walked back inside. I stood alone on the porch. I looked down at the folder. I had come to my parents' anniversary party expecting cake, photographs, and an ordinary family dinner. Instead, I was holding documents that claimed I owed my family a debt I had never heard of. And my brother had just warned me that the papers I was holding were only part of the plan. I drove home without turning on the radio. I locked my front door behind me. Then I placed the brown folder on my kitchen table. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. Finally, I opened it again. This time, I read every page. And on the fourth page, I found the name of a company I had never heard of. Voss Property Holdings. The company had been registered only 6 weeks earlier. 6 weeks before my mother handed me those papers. And somehow, my house was already listed in its financial records. I stared at the name on the page until the letters stopped looking like words. Voss Property Holdings. I had never heard of it. Yet my address was listed directly beneath the company name. I checked the document again. Then I checked the date. The company had been registered 42 days earlier. The property transfer papers my mother had handed me had been prepared 6 weeks earlier. Everything had started at almost exactly the same time. That was too precise to ignore. I sat at my kitchen table until nearly midnight, reading every page in the folder. The more I read, the less sense it made. According to the documents, I had supposedly agreed to contribute my house to a family property arrangement. There was a section describing the transfer as part of a voluntary intergenerational settlement. I had never heard that phrase before. I had certainly never agreed to it. I pulled out my laptop and opened my banking records. My mortgage was still active. My monthly payments were current. My down payment had come from my own savings. I had receipts from the contractor who renovated the kitchen. I had invoices for the roof. I had every major financial document connected to the house. Nothing connected my property to my parents. Nothing connected it to Oren. And absolutely nothing connected it to Voss Property Holdings. At 12:37 a.m., I found something that made me stop. The company had an online registration record. Its listed director was my mother, Mavra Voss. I leaned back in my chair. Why would you create a property company? I said the question aloud, even though nobody was there. Then I searched the company's financial filings. There were no public details about its business operations. But the registration was enough to confirm that this wasn't something my mother had casually mentioned at dinner. She had created an actual company. And she had created it shortly before demanding my house. I slept for less than 4 hours. At 7 the next morning, I drove to the county records office. The building was downtown, 3 blocks from the courthouse. I had visited it several times for work because structural projects sometimes required property records. That morning, however, I was there for myself. At the public counter, a woman named Celine Arkwright greeted me. Celine had worked there for years. We had lived in neighboring houses when I was younger, although we had never been close friends. Ilira, she said, I haven't seen you in months. I need help checking a property filing. Her expression became professional.
Sure.
Which property? I gave her my address. She entered it into the system. At first, her face showed nothing. Then her eyebrows moved slightly. Is there a problem? I asked. She looked at me. There is a recent filing. What kind? She turned the monitor slightly toward herself. A notice of interest. From whom? She typed again. Voss Property Holdings. My stomach tightened. That's my mother's company. Celine looked at me. Your mother owns a company? Apparently. She printed the filing. I took it from her. The notice claimed that the company had a financial interest in my property. I read the statement twice. That's false. Celine did not argue. Instead, she asked, "Did you sign anything?"
No.
"Are you sure?" "Completely." She looked at another screen. "There is also an electronic submission." "What does it say?" She hesitated. "It contains a signature." "Mine." Celine nodded. I felt the air leave my lungs. "Can I see it?" She printed another page. The signature was supposed to be mine. It looked convincing at first glance. The letters were shaped similarly. The spacing was close. But I knew my own signature. The final stroke was wrong. I signed documents every week for work. I knew exactly how my hand moved. "This isn't my signature." Celine studied it. "Then you may have a serious problem." "How serious?" She lowered her voice. "Someone may have submitted a fraudulent property document." I took photographs of everything. Then I noticed another line. The filing had been rejected once.
Why?
Celine checked the rejection note. "Notarization problem." "When?" "3 weeks ago." I stared at her. "So someone tried to register this before?" "Yes. And now my mother wants me to sign a new version." Celine looked at me carefully. "That would make the paperwork much easier to validate." I understood immediately. My mother had already tried to move my property without me. It had failed. Now she wanted my real signature. I left the records office and called the attorney who had handled my house purchase 8 years earlier. His name was Dorian Vale. His office was on the 5th floor of a glass building near the river. When I arrived, he recognized me immediately.
Illyra.
"It's been a while. I need you to look at something." He read the papers in silence. His expression changed as he reached the company documents. "Where did you get these?" "My mother handed them to me at her anniversary party." He looked up. "She asked you to sign?" "Yes." "Did you?"
No.
"Good." That was the first time anyone had said the word without sounding surprised. Dorian continued reading. After several minutes, he asked, "Have you ever signed an agreement with this company?"
No.
"Have you ever borrowed money from it?"
No.
"Have you ever transferred any ownership interest in your house?"
No.
He nodded. "Then your title appears clean." "Appears?" "Because someone has attempted to create a competing claim." He opened another database. "There is something else." He showed me a record. Voss Property Holdings had outstanding liabilities. Several of them. I read the list. A business credit line. A private loan. Unpaid contractor invoices. A pending civil claim. And one loan that made me sit back. $387,000. That's almost $400,000. Yes. Who borrowed it? The company. Who guaranteed it? He pointed to the next line. Mavra Voss. My mother. I stared at the screen. Why would she need my house? Dorian folded his hands. "If the company is in financial trouble, she may be trying to use your property as collateral. But she can't. Not without an interest in the property. Which she doesn't have." Correct. I remembered the folder. The transfer document. The fake family settlement. The strange company. The forged signature. So, she wants me to give her the interest. Dorian nodded. "That is one possibility." "What is the other?" "She may want you to transfer the property to your brother first." "Why?" "Because the transaction could be structured differently after that." I felt my throat tighten. "Explain." "If Oren becomes the owner, he could refinance the property. And the money could be used to satisfy the company's debts." I stared at him. "Then why pretend this is about giving my brother a home?" Dorian's answer was simple. Because people are more willing to give away something when they believe they're helping someone they love. I left his office at noon. The sky was overcast. I sat in my car and called Oren. He answered after the second ring. "Hello. Where are you?" "At work." "I need to ask you something." He was silent. "Did Mom tell you about Voss Property Holdings?" Another silence. "Oren." "Yes." "When?" "A few weeks ago." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was going to." "When?" "I don't know." I closed my eyes. Did Mom tell you the company owes money? He exhaled slowly. Yes. How much? I don't know. Oren. Illyra, I really don't know. His voice sounded strained. Then tell me what you do know. He took a breath. Mom said she was trying to fix everything. Everything. Our family's finances. Why would our family's finances require my house? I didn't know about the house until recently. She told you. She said she was going to ask you for help. Help. She said you had enough equity to solve the problem. I gripped the steering wheel. Did she say what would happen to the house? He didn't answer. Oren. She said I would get it. My stomach dropped. Get what? Your house. I said nothing. He continued. She said you'd transfer it to me. And then, I don't know. You're lying. I'm not. Then why did you look terrified last night? He stopped talking. I heard traffic in the background. Finally, he said, because Mom told me if you refused, I would lose everything. What does that mean? I have debts. How much? I don't know exactly. How did you get them? He hesitated. Mom helped me. That answer was worse than silence. I ended the call. That afternoon, I returned home and began searching through every document I had. At 5:30, I found an old folder from when I bought the house. Inside was the original purchase agreement. The money trail was clear. My savings account, my mortgage, my closing costs, my name, only my name. I photographed every page and sent them to Dorian. Then I opened the county filing again. There was one section I had not noticed before. A previous version of the transfer had been submitted using a scanned copy of my signature. The date was 3 weeks earlier. The filing had been rejected because the notary information did not match. Someone had already tried to take my house. Someone had already failed. And my mother had known. That night, I received a text message from her. You need to come back tomorrow. We are going to finish this properly. I stared at the message. Then another arrived. Bring the folder. I didn't respond. A third message appeared. If you refuse, Oren will be the one who pays for it. I read it 3 times. Then I took a screenshot. I sent it to Dorian. His reply came within a minute. Do not meet her alone. I looked at the clock. It was 9:14 p.m. I thought the worst part was discovering that my mother wanted my house. I was wrong. The worst part was realizing she had already planned what would happen to my brother if I refused. And the next morning, Oren called me before I could even leave the house. His first words were not an apology. They were a warning. Illyra, you need to listen carefully. I sat down. What happened? Mom has something else. What? I don't know how she got it. What is it? His voice dropped to a whisper. A copy of your mortgage. I froze. That's impossible. I know. Where did she get it? I found it in her office. My hand tightened around the phone. Oren, what else did you find? He was silent for several seconds. Then he said, your bank statements. I stood up. How long has she had them? I don't know. And why? Illyra. What? I think she's been preparing this for much longer than we thought. The call ended. I looked toward the locked front door. For the first time since I bought the house, I wondered whether someone in my own family had been watching my finances, collecting my documents, and waiting for the right moment to make me sign. Then I looked at the brown folder on my table. There was still one document inside that I had not fully examined. A page attached to the back had been folded in half. I opened it. At the top was my full name. Underneath, it was a number. $612,000. I did not sleep that night. The 3 words on the document kept running through my mind. Transfer, refinance, distribute. At 6:10 the next morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with every document spread across the surface. My house was worth approximately $612,000. My mortgage balance was much lower. That meant there was substantial equity. Enough to solve a serious financial problem. Enough to attract people who did not care, who had earned it. I called Dorian at 8. He answered immediately. Illyra, I found something else. I read the 3 words to him. There was a pause. Don't touch the original document. I already photographed it.
Good.
Keep the original somewhere secure. Can you explain what distribute means? I can explain several possibilities. I can't tell you which one applies until we see the complete financial structure. I need to know. I understand. His voice became firm. Do not sign anything your mother gives you. I won't. And don't tell her everything you know.
Why?
Because we don't know who else is involved. That sentence stayed with me. I had been thinking about my mother and Oren. Now I had to consider the possibility that someone outside the family was involved too. At 9:30, I drove to my office. My employer had no idea what was happening. I spent the morning reviewing structural drawings while my mind stayed somewhere else. At lunch, I received an email from our compliance department. The subject line was, "Urgent. Request for information." My heart dropped. The message said a complaint had been filed against my professional license. The accusation was that I had falsified engineering inspection reports. I read the message 3 times. It was completely false. I called my supervisor. "Marcus, did you know about this?" "I just received the notice." "Who filed it?" "We're trying to find out." "I've never falsified a report." "I know." His answer came quickly. "But until the board reviews it, we have to put you on administrative leave." I stared through the glass wall of my office. When, effective immediately, I closed my eyes. My mother had just found another way to pressure me. If I lost my license, I would lose my job. If I lost my job, keeping the house would become harder. And if I became desperate enough, perhaps I would sell it. I called Dorian again. They filed a complaint against my license. He was silent. "Do you know what it says?" "Yes."
How?
"Because the complaint was attached to a property-related dispute." I stood. "What?" "The person who filed it appears to be connected to the same legal network involved with your mother's company." My anger sharpened. "So this isn't random."
No.
"Can they do this?" "They can file a complaint. That doesn't mean they'll win." "But why attack my career?" "Pressure." I looked around my office. "Because they need me to become financially vulnerable." "Exactly." I drove home early. For the first time in years, I felt uncertain about my future. At 3:20 p.m., I received a call from Oren. I heard,
How?
"Mom." I laughed bitterly. "Of course. She said you were going to lose your license." "She knows?" "Yes."
How?
"I don't know." I sat on the edge of my bed. "Oren, I need you to be honest with me." "I am." "Did you sign anything?" He didn't answer. "Oren, I signed some documents." "What documents?" "Loan papers." "What kind?" "I don't know." I stood. "You don't know?" "Mom said they were temporary." "How much?" He sighed. "About $180,000. I felt sick. $180,000? That's what the collection letters say. Where did the money go? I never got it. What? I thought Mom was using my name for business credit. She said she'd make the payments. I walked toward the window. Did you authorize her? Some of the paperwork. Then you may have a problem. I know.
No.
Oren, listen to me. If your name is on those loans, she may be planning to use the house to pay them.
He was silent.
I think that's what she wants. His voice became very quiet. Then I'm the reason she's after your house.
No.
But if I hadn't... Stop. I interrupted him. This is not your fault. He did not respond. Then he said, I found something else. What? Mom has a separate office. I frowned. Where? At the old warehouse. The one near the industrial district? Yes. Why? I don't know. How do you know about it? I went there yesterday. My pulse increased. What did you see? Boxes. Of what? Documents. I waited. And your name was on several of them. That afternoon, I drove to the warehouse. I did not go inside. The building stood behind a row of auto repair shops. Its windows were dusty. A small sign on the door carried the name Voss Property Holdings. I took photographs from the parking lot. Then I noticed a man leaving through a side entrance. He was tall, wearing a charcoal jacket.
He stopped when he saw me.
For several seconds, Neither of us moved. Then he walked toward a black sedan and drove away. I photographed the license plate. I sent it to Dorian. His response came 5 minutes later. Do not approach him. Then, I know that name. I called him. Who is he? Calder Rusk. Who? Private financial consultant. Is he working with my mother? Apparently. Apparently. I need to verify it. I looked at the warehouse. Did he arrange the loans? I don't know yet. What I do know, Dorian said, is that Calder has been involved in several distressed property transactions. Meaning, he specializes in properties where owners are under financial pressure. My stomach tightened. So, my mother found someone who buys houses from desperate owners. Possibly. I drove home. At 7 that evening, someone knocked on my door. I checked through the peephole. It was Oren. I opened the door. He looked exhausted. Can I come in? I stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table. I need to show you something. He removed his phone from his pocket. I found this in Mom's office. It was a photograph of a spreadsheet. I zoomed in. There were several columns. My name.
My house.
Estimated value. Mortgage balance. Projected refinance. Then, a final column. Distribution. Next to my address was a figure. $612,000. Underneath it were 3 names. Mavra Voss. Oren Voss. Calder Rusk. I looked at my brother. What is Calder getting? I don't know. Did Mom tell you?
No.
Then why is his name here? Oren shook his head. I don't know. I enlarged the image. There was another line at the bottom. Flight. Lisbon, September 18th. I stared at it. What's September 18th? Mom's flight. I looked at him. Are you sure? I found the confirmation in her email. Why would she be flying to Lisbon? I don't know. But I did. She was preparing to leave. That was the first moment I understood the timeline. She needed the property. She needed the money. And then she intended to disappear. I called Dorian. He arrived at my house 40 minutes later. We spread everything across the kitchen table. Dorian studied the spreadsheet. This is significant. Can it prove fraud? It can support the case. What else do we need? Evidence connecting these numbers to an actual plan. I showed him the photograph from the warehouse. Then the forged signature. Then the county rejection. Then my mother's messages. Then Oren's documents. He looked through everything carefully. Finally, he said, there is enough here to move forward. Then let's report her. We will. Today. Yes. But before we could make the call, Oren's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed. Who is it? He didn't answer. The phone stopped. Then started again. He showed me the number. Unknown. I told him not to answer. The caller left a voicemail. We played it. A man's voice said, tell Ilira to sign the papers. If she doesn't, your debt becomes due immediately. The message ended. Nobody spoke. Dorian looked at Oren. That voice. You know him? Dorian nodded. Calder Rusk. I felt a cold rush through me. Until that moment, I had thought my mother was the person controlling the situation. Now I understood she had brought someone else into it. Someone who was willing to threaten my brother. Someone who knew exactly how much my house was worth. Someone who had access to the financial structure surrounding my family. I looked at Dorian. What happens if we report them? They'll know. Then let them know. He nodded. We prepared the evidence. But before we could submit everything, another message arrived on my phone. It was from my mother. Tomorrow at noon. Come to the old warehouse. Alone. A second message appeared. If you bring your lawyer, Oren goes to court. I stared at the screen. Dorian immediately said, don't go. I know, but there was something else. A third message appeared. This one contained a photograph. It showed my front door. Taken that morning. Underneath it, my mother had written, you should understand by now that I know everything you do. I looked at the photograph. Then I looked at the locked door behind me. My mother wasn't merely trying to take my house anymore. She was watching me. And whoever had taken that photograph had been close enough to stand on my property. I finally understood why she had insisted on the anniversary party. She had not wanted to negotiate. She had wanted to make me feel surrounded. But there was one thing she had not considered. I was no longer dealing with her alone. And, before sunrise the next day, someone else would step forward with information that could change the entire case. I did not go to the warehouse alone. I did not go at all. At 7:15 the next morning, Dorian called me and told me to stay away from the property. Your mother wants you there because she believes she can control the conversation. What if she threatens Oren? Then we document the threat. She already threatened him. I know. What are we doing? We're waiting. I hated that answer. Waiting felt wrong when my career was suspended, my brother was carrying debts he did not understand, and someone had photographed my front door. But Dorian had spent years handling legal disputes. He understood something I didn't. The person making the most mistakes was not me. It was my mother. At 8:40, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. There was no greeting. Only one sentence. You don't know what your mother has been hiding. An attachment followed. I opened it. It was a scanned ledger. The first pages showed company expenses, then personal withdrawals, then transfers between accounts. I recognized my mother's name, but I also saw another name repeatedly. Calder Rusk. I forwarded everything to Dorian. His response came quickly. Don't open anything else from that address. Save the original email. Who sent it? I don't know. Can you trace it? I'm working on it. At 10:10, another message arrived. This time it was from a woman. My name is Peregrine Holt. We need to talk. I almost laughed. The name was unusual enough that I assumed it was a mistake. Then the woman called. Her voice was older, calm, and direct. I worked as your mother's accountant. I sat up. For how long? 11 years. Why are you contacting me? Because I quit 3 months ago.
Why?
Because I discovered what she was doing. I looked toward the kitchen table. Doing what? Using family members as financial shields. My throat tightened. Can you prove it? I kept copies. I immediately called Dorian. He told me to meet her at his office. At 11:30, Peregrine arrived. She was 71, wore a dark green coat, and carried a cardboard archive box. She placed it on Dorian's desk. I didn't steal these. Dorian nodded. I believe you. Peregrine looked at me. You look like your father. I did not know how to respond. She opened the box. The company was failing long before your mother created Voss Property Holdings. She removed a series of statements. She had been borrowing from private lenders for almost 2 years. I studied the numbers. Why? She believed she could recover everything through property investments. Did she own other properties? Yes. Then why mine? Because the others were already heavily leveraged. She pulled out another file. Your house was the only property she knew had substantial equity. I felt anger rising. How did she know how much equity I had? Peregrine looked at Dorian, then back at me. She monitored your mortgage. My stomach tightened.
How?
She had access to documents you gave her years ago. I shook my head. That can't be enough. It wasn't. She reached into the box again. Your mother contacted your mortgage servicer using information from your old financial records. Dorian interrupted. Did she impersonate Illyra? Not directly. Then how? She claimed to be acting as a family representative. I looked at him. Could they legally give her my information? Not without proper authorization. Peregrine nodded. That's why the requests were made through a third party. Who? She said the name. Calder Rusk. The room became silent. So Calder had not appeared suddenly. He had been involved from the beginning. Peregrine continued. Calder contacted your mother after one of her business loans went into default. How did they meet? Through a lender. What does he do? He finds people with financial problems and helps restructure assets. That's what Dorian said. Peregrine shook her head. He doesn't just restructure them. She opened another file. He acquires them. I looked at the documents. Several property owners had transferred homes after financial distress. Calder's companies appeared repeatedly. These people lost their properties? Most of them. Legally? On paper. I looked at Dorian. What does that mean? Transactions can be technically documented while still being fraudulent if the consent was obtained through deception or forged documents. Peregrine nodded. That's what worried me. She pulled out one final document. It was a loan proposal. My address was listed as collateral. The borrower was Voss Property Holdings. The proposed lender was one of Calder's affiliated companies. I stared at the page. How did they plan to transfer it? Peregrine answered. Through Oren. I looked at her. Why him? Because your mother knew you wouldn't transfer the property directly to her. That made sense. She continued. She told Oren that if he became the owner, he could refinance the house and use the proceeds to settle his debts. So, he was supposed to think he was saving himself. Yes. And Mom would get the money. Yes. What about Calder? Peregrine's expression became serious. He would receive a percentage for arranging the transaction. How much? She showed me the number. I stared. Nearly $90,000. That was enough to make someone very interested in a $600,000 house. But then Peregrine said something that changed the entire picture. Your mother planned to keep the remainder. How much? Approximately $300,000. I looked at Dorian. She planned to take that much? After fees and debts, apparently. Peregrine closed the file. There is more. I waited. Your mother did not intend to remain in the country after the transfer. We found the flight. Then you know. Lisbon. She nodded. She has been preparing to leave for months. I leaned back. For the first time, the entire plan looked organized. The anniversary party, the transfer papers, the forged signature, the company, the loans, the threat against Oren, the complaint against my license, the flight, every part connected. But Dorian still looked troubled.
What?
He pointed at the ledger. These transactions are enough to establish motive, but I want to know who authorized the forged documents. Peregrine looked at me. I can tell you. I leaned forward.
Who?
Not your mother. I froze.
What?
Your mother gave instructions. To whom? Peregrine hesitated. Her assistant. Who is that? A woman named Briala Kest. I had never heard the name. Where is she? She quit 2 weeks ago. Why? Because she found out what the documents were being used for. Dorian wrote the name down. Do you know where she is now? Peregrine nodded. She works at a print shop in East Market. An hour later, we found Briala. She was 32 and visibly nervous. When she saw me, she immediately apologized. I didn't know what they were doing. What did you do? I printed documents. What documents? Property forms. With my name? She nodded. Did you forge my signature?
No.
She looked at Dorian. Someone else did. Who? Calder. I felt my hands tighten. How do you know? Because he brought me the scans. Did my mother know? Yes. Did she ask you to print them? She told me they were legitimate. And when did you realize they weren't? The first time the county rejected them. My heart stopped. The first filing? Yes. Why didn't you say anything? She looked down. I was afraid. Of my mother? Of Calder. That explained why everyone around my mother seemed frightened. Briala reached into her bag. I kept something. She handed Dorian a small envelope. Inside was a receipt from a printing shop. The order included several documents. One item was described as property transfer packet, Illyra Voss, 3 copies. The date was 6 weeks before the anniversary party. Dorian photographed it. Then Briala added something else. I also have a recording. My heart began pounding. Of what? Your mother and Calder. Where? At the warehouse. Can we hear it? She nodded. She opened her phone. The recording began with background noise. Then my mother's voice. She will sign. Calder answered. What if she doesn't? Then we use the brother. His debt. Exactly. I closed my eyes. My mother continued. He'll pressure her himself. Calder laughed. And if that fails? There was a pause. Then we make her desperate. I heard my own mother's voice say the words that I would never forget. Take away the career. Take away the security. People sign when they believe they have no other choice. The recording ended. Nobody spoke. I looked at Dorian. That's enough. He nodded. But before we could submit the evidence, Briella stopped me. There's one more thing.
What?
She looked terrified. Your mother knows I have the recording. My blood ran cold.
How?
She called me last night. What did she say? Briella swallowed. She said I had until tomorrow to give it back. And if you don't, she said Calder would handle it. Dorian immediately told her to stay somewhere secure. Then his phone rang. He listened. His expression changed. He looked at me. The state investigator wants to meet us.
Now. Now.
We left the office. As we walked toward the elevator, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. You found Peregrine. I stopped. Another message arrived. You found Briella too. Then a third. You still don't understand, Illyra. I stared at the screen. A final message appeared. The house was never the real target. I looked at Dorian. What does that mean? He didn't answer. Because at that exact moment, the elevator doors opened. A man was standing inside. Calder Rusk. He looked directly at me. Then he smiled. And before the doors closed, he said 6 words. Ask your father what he owed us. The elevator disappeared below us. I stood frozen. My father had been dead for 4 years. And until that moment, I had believed he had left our family with nothing but memories. Now someone was telling me he had left behind a debt. A debt large enough to put my entire family in danger. And suddenly, my mother's obsession with my house made a lot less sense. For several seconds after Calder disappeared behind the elevator doors, nobody spoke. I was still staring at the empty hallway. Ask your father what he owed us. Those words kept repeating in my head. My father had been dead for 4 years.
He could not answer me.
Dorian touched my shoulder. Illyra, don't assume Calder was telling the truth. I know, but I didn't know. That was the problem. Until that moment, I had believed the entire scheme had started with my mother's financial problems. Now there was a possibility that she had been hiding something from me for years. We went directly to the state investigator's office. His name was Renwick Hale. He was a serious man in his 50s who had already reviewed the documents Dorian submitted. He listened while we explained what Calder had said. When I finished, Renwick opened a file. Your father's name appears in one of the older records. I stared at him. What records? A civil claim from 9 years ago. My stomach tightened. Against my father? Not exactly. He turned the file toward me. The claimant was a company I had never heard of. Northbridge Capital Services. What was the claim? An unpaid private loan. How much? $240,000. I looked at Dorian. My father never told me about this. Did your mother know? Renwick nodded. She was listed as a witness. I felt numb. Was the debt ever paid? According to the court record, yes. When? 4 years ago. The year my father died. I looked at the date. The payment had been made 2 weeks after his funeral. Who paid it? Renwick turned another page. Mavra Voss. I sat back. My mother had paid a $250,000 debt after my father's death. And she had never mentioned it. Where did she get the money? That's what we're trying to determine. Dorian asked, could this be connected to Calder? Renwick nodded toward another document. Northbridge Capital was later acquired by a holding company. He showed us the corporate record. The current controlling entity was linked to Calder Rusk. I felt my hands go cold. So Calder's company owned the old debt. Eventually. Why would he care about it now? Renwick looked at me. Because the debt may not have been settled the way you think. He explained that the original loan agreement contained a clause allowing claims against certain family assets if the borrower defaulted. My father's name was the borrower. My mother had apparently paid enough to stop immediate legal action. But there was an attached guarantee. I read it. My father's signature appeared at the bottom. Then I saw another name. Mavra Voss. She had guaranteed the loan. What was the money for? Renwick shook his head. The original application says business expansion. Did my father own a business? Not officially. I frowned. My father had been a mechanical contractor. He had owned a small workshop for years. But I had never known about a separate investment company. Dorian pointed to a paragraph. There's something here. It described an investment partnership. My father's name was listed alongside another investor. The other investor was Calder's father. I stared at the document. So our families knew each other. Apparently, Renwick said. That changed the entire story. My mother had not randomly chosen Calder. She had known his family for years. And my father's old debt gave him a reason to claim that he was owed something. But there was still one question. If the debt was paid, why would Calder still be threatening us? Renwick looked at the payment records. Because the payment may have covered only the principal. Dorian leaned closer. What about interest? There's a disputed balance. How much? Renwick named the amount. I almost laughed. You're telling me my mother is risking my house over disputed interest? No. He looked directly at me. That's what I don't understand. The room became quiet. Something didn't fit. My mother had created a company. She had borrowed hundreds of thousands. She had targeted my house. She had used Oren's identity. She had planned a refinance. She had arranged a flight. But now we had discovered an old family debt. It felt connected. Yet it was not the whole explanation. Then Dorian asked a question. Where is the original loan agreement? Renwick checked the file. We only have a certified copy. Who has the original? According to the record, Maevra Voss. I looked at him. My mother? Yes. I understood. She had kept it.
Why?
That evening, I went home with Dorian. I did not want to be alone. The house was quiet. I made coffee while he reviewed the documents. Then, Oren arrived. He looked terrible. I heard about Calder. Who told you? Mom. I turned around. She contacted you? Yes. What did she say? She said you're making everything worse. I almost smiled. Of course. Oren sat down. Then he pulled out a key. What is that? Mom's old storage unit. I stared at him. How did you get it? She gave it to me months ago. Why? She said I might need some documents. I took the key. Where? South Harbor Storage. We drove there that night. The facility was nearly empty. Rows of metal doors stretched beneath bright fluorescent lights. Oren led me to Unit 214. The lock opened with the key. Inside were boxes. Dozens of them. Old business records. Bank statements. Tax documents. Photographs. My father had labeled many of them himself. I opened the first box. There were workshop invoices. The second contained insurance records. The third contained correspondence. Then I found a folder marked with my father's handwriting. Northbridge, private. My hands started shaking. I opened it. Inside was the original loan agreement. But the amount was not $240,000. It was $90,000. I looked at Dorian. That's not what the claim said. He read the agreement.
No.
Why would the court records show $240,000? He turned another page. There was a second agreement. A refinancing document. My father had apparently borrowed additional money later. But something was wrong. The signature on the second document did not look like his. Dorian compared it with an original contract. It's not his signature. Oren stared at us. Someone forged Dad's signature? Possibly. I kept searching. Then I found a letter. It was addressed to my mother. The date was 2 months before my father's death. I read it. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. Maevra, if Calder comes back, don't give him anything. The money was never what he says it was. You know that. I stopped breathing. There was more. I never authorized the second loan. Someone used the company documents without my permission. If anything happens to me, take the records to an attorney. Do not trust Northbridge. I read the final sentence twice. And never involve Illyra. She has nothing to do with this. I looked at my mother in my mind. All those years. She had known. My father had specifically told her to keep me out of it. And she had done the opposite. She had dragged me into the same conflict he had tried to protect me from. Then Oren found another folder. This has my name. He opened it. Inside were documents from 3 months earlier. His signatures. Loan authorizations. Power of attorney forms. But one page contained something unexpected. A handwritten note from my mother. Oren will be easier to persuade than Illyra. Use his debts first. Oren dropped the page. She planned this. Yes. He looked sick. I was never supposed to get the house. I looked at him. What do you mean? He pointed to another document. It was a proposed property transaction. The first step transferred my house to Oren. The second step transferred the house into a company controlled by Calder. The third step authorized the sale. Oren would not even remain the owner. He had been used as a temporary bridge. He would get the house only long enough to make the next transfer possible. I felt something inside me settle. The confusion was finally disappearing. My mother had not wanted to save Oren. She had not wanted to help him. She had used his debt to make him obedient. She had used my career to make me desperate. And she had used our father's old financial dispute to frighten us into believing Calder had a legitimate claim. The entire scheme had been built on fear. But then I noticed another document. It was a bank transfer receipt. The sender was Mavra Voss. The recipient was Calder Rusk. The amount was $75,000. The date was 3 weeks before the anniversary party. The description said, Settlement, Illyra property. I stared at it. This is impossible. Dorian took the document. She already paid him. For what? Apparently for his involvement. That meant Calder had been paid before I ever saw the papers. He had already been working on the transfer. Then Oren whispered, There's one more. He reached into the box and pulled out a sealed envelope. It had my name on it. Not my mother's handwriting. My father's. I opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter. Illyra, if you're reading this, something went wrong. I need you to know one thing. The house was never part of my debt. It belongs to you. Your mother knows this. If she ever tells you otherwise, don't believe her. I could barely continue. The last line was written darker than the others. The person who caused the debt is not the person you think. I looked at Oren, then Dorian. Nobody spoke. My father had died believing the truth would eventually be discovered. But he had left one question behind. Who had actually created the debt? And why had my mother spent years pretending she was protecting our family? Before we could investigate further, my phone rang. The number was unknown. I answered. Nobody spoke for 3 seconds. Then Calder's voice came through. You found your father's letter. I froze. How do you know? He laughed quietly. Because I know exactly what was in that box. I looked around the storage unit.
How?
Because I put some of it there. My blood ran cold. What did you do to my father? The line went silent. Then Calder said, Ask your mother. The call ended. I immediately called Dorian. But before he could respond, another phone in the storage unit began ringing. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Oren's. It was an old landline sitting inside one of the boxes. The screen showed a number I recognized. My mother's. Oren stared at me. Why would Mom's number be calling from here? I slowly picked up the phone. Hello. My mother's voice answered. Illyra. I couldn't speak. She continued. You should never have opened that box. Tell me the truth. You don't know what you're asking. Who caused Dad's debt? She was silent. Then she whispered something that changed everything. Your father didn't owe Calder anything. Then why? Because Calder owed your father. I stood completely still. My mother continued. And your father had proof. The call ended. I looked at the boxes around me. For the first time, I understood that the house might never have been the beginning of this story. It might have been the last piece of evidence my father left behind. And somewhere in those boxes was the proof that could expose what had really happened 4 years ago. The old phone went silent. I stood in the storage unit with my hand still holding the receiver. My mother's last words were impossible to ignore. Your father didn't owe Calder anything. I looked at Dorian. Then Calder owed my father. Dorian nodded slowly. That changes the entire case. Oren was standing beside the shelves, staring at the boxes. What proof did Dad have? I don't know, I said. But I knew where we had to start. We searched every box. At 11:45 that night, We found a folder hidden beneath several old insurance records. The label was simple: Workshop Accounts, Final. Inside were bank statements, invoices, partnership agreements, and copies of emails. The first documents showed my father's workshop had transferred money to a company owned by Calder's father. But the transfers were not loans. They were payments for equipment. My father had purchased machinery. The equipment was never delivered. I looked at the invoices. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been paid. Then I found a letter from my father to his attorney. It explained that the equipment supplier had taken his money, failed to deliver the equipment, and then demanded additional financing. The supplier's director was Calder's father. Dorian read the letter. This wasn't a debt.
No.
It was a dispute. I nodded. Then we found the most important document: a settlement proposal. My father had agreed to forgive part of the missing equipment claim if Calder's father returned the remaining money. But the agreement was never completed. Instead, the company declared bankruptcy. Calder inherited the records. And apparently, he inherited the grudge. I looked at Oren. So Calder spent years trying to make Dad look like the debtor. Dorian shook his head. Not exactly. He pointed to a transaction. Look at this. A payment had been made from Calder's company to my mother. 4 years ago, 2 weeks after my father's funeral. The amount was $150,000. I felt sick. Mom received money from Calder? Yes.
Why?
We searched further. There were 3 more payments. Together, they totaled nearly $240,000. The same amount that had appeared in the false debt claim against my father. I understood. My mother had received money from Calder. Then she used the same amount to make it appear that she was paying off my father's debt.
But why?
Dorian looked at the dates. Your father was investigating the original equipment fraud before he died. What happened to his investigation? Maybe this is why your mother stopped it. I stared at the records. My father had discovered that Calder's family owed him money. My mother had received money from Calder. Then, after my father died, she claimed she was settling his debt. And years later, Calder returned demanding my house. The connection was no longer theoretical.
It was documented.
We left the storage unit before dawn. Dorian contacted the investigators immediately. The evidence was submitted. The forged property documents, the financial records, the payments from Calder, my father's letters, the recording of my mother and Calder. Everything. At 9 a.m., Renwick Hale called. We're moving now. Against whom? Your mother and Calder. What happens to Oren? We'll review the documents involving his debts. And my house. The property claim will be challenged. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. But it wasn't over. My mother's flight to Lisbon was scheduled for the following day. Renwick told me investigators were trying to prevent her from leaving. That afternoon, I received another call. My mother. I answered. Where are you? At home. Are you going to the airport? She laughed softly. You always were direct. Did Dad know Calder was stealing from him? He suspected. Did you help Calder? Silence. Then she said, I made a mistake. What kind? I believed I could fix it. By sacrificing me?
No.
By using Oren?
No.
By forging my signature? She began crying. I was trying to keep both of you safe. That's not protection. She didn't answer. I continued. How much did Calder pay you? Silence. Mom. Finally, she said, enough to make me believe I could make everything disappear. And did it?
No.
Why did you create the property company? Because Calder threatened to expose the old transaction. What transaction? The money. What money? The money your father lost. I waited. She finally explained. After my father's death, Calder approached her. He had evidence that my father had been investigating his family. He threatened to expose the financial records and accuse my mother of participating in the dispute. She panicked. She accepted money. Then she used that money to pay what she claimed was my father's debt. But Calder kept copies of everything. Years later, when her business began failing, he demanded repayment. She couldn't pay. So, he offered another solution. My house. He told me if you transferred it, everything would be settled. You believed him? I had no choice. You always had a choice.
She cried.
I was afraid. I closed my eyes. So you made me afraid too. She said nothing. Mom, why did you use Oren? Because he trusted me. That answer hurt more than anything else. You used the fact that your own son trusted you. I thought I was saving him. You were making him responsible for debts he never created. I know. And me? I thought you'd fight. I did. She whispered. I know. The call ended. The next morning, investigators arrested Calder at the airport. My mother surrendered later that afternoon. The case took months. There was no dramatic courtroom confession. There was no single moment when everyone applauded. There were documents, bank records, emails,
Signatures.
audio recordings, and testimony. Piece by piece, the truth became impossible to deny. Calder was convicted of fraud, document forgery, and financial crimes. My mother pleaded guilty to conspiracy, fraud, and forgery. Her company was dissolved. The property claim against my house was permanently removed. My professional license was restored. The complaint against me was dismissed. Oren's fraudulent debts were reviewed. Several were canceled after investigators proved that the loans had been obtained through deception. But the consequences did not stop there. The court ordered my mother to repay the money she had taken. Calder's assets were seized. The $75,000 payment connected to my property was recovered. My mother lost the house she had planned to purchase overseas. Her bank accounts were restricted. She had no control over the family finances anymore. For the first time in my life, nobody could use the word family to force me into surrendering something. 6 months later, I stood in my own kitchen. The brown folder was still in a drawer. I took it out. The first page was the document my mother had handed me at the anniversary party. Property transfer agreement. I remembered the room.
The cake.
The relatives. Oren looking at the floor. My mother's voice. Sign your house over to your brother. At the time, I had thought she was asking me to sacrifice my home for my brother. Now I knew the truth. She had been trying to turn my brother into the doorway through which she could take everything. I tore the document in half. Then I tore it again. I threw the pieces away. A week later, Oren came to visit. He brought a small box. What's that? Something Dad left. Inside was his old workshop key. I looked at it. I thought the workshop was sold.
It was.
Then why keep the key? Oren smiled. Because Dad wrote something on the back. I turned it over. For words were engraved into the metal. Keep what you build yourself. I stared at them. My father had not known what would happen years later. But somehow the words fit. I kept the key. Not because I needed the workshop. Because I needed the reminder. My life was mine. My career was mine. My home was mine. My mistakes were mine. And my choices were mine. Oren and I became closer after everything ended. Not because the past disappeared. It didn't. We still had difficult conversations. We still disagreed sometimes. But there was no longer a competition between us for our mother's approval. We had finally understood that neither of us had been the enemy. We had both been used. And once we saw that, we stopped letting someone else's manipulation define our relationship. 1 year after the anniversary party, I invited Oren to dinner at my house. He stood in the doorway and looked around. Still yours. I smiled. Still mine. He laughed. Mom would hate that. Probably. We sat at the kitchen table. For the first time, the house felt completely different. Not because anything had changed in the walls. Because I no longer associated it with fear. It was simply my home. The place I came back to after work. The place where I cooked dinner. The place where my brother could sit without worrying that someone would use him against me. The place my father had once told me I had earned myself. Years earlier, my mother had placed a folder in my hands and ordered me to sign my house away. I said no. That single word started a chain of events that exposed forged documents, hidden debts, financial fraud, and a secret my parents had carried for years. But the greatest lesson was not about property. It was about control. My mother believed that because she had raised me, she had the right to decide what I owed her. She believed my brother's struggles gave her the right to use him. Calder believed fear could make people surrender what belonged to them. They were both wrong. I did not win because I was stronger than them. I won because I stopped signing things I did not understand. I stopped accepting explanations that contradicted the evidence. And I stopped believing that protecting my family meant destroying myself. My mother lost her freedom. Calder lost his business and his assets. Orrin lost years to debts he never should have carried. But I lost something too. I lost the version of my mother I had spent my entire life trying to please. And strangely, that loss gave me peace. I no longer needed her approval. I no longer needed her to admit I had worked hard. I no longer needed her to call me a good daughter. I knew who I was. Illyra Voss. Engineer. Homeowner.
Sister. Daughter.
And finally, my own person. The house stayed in my name. The mortgage continued to be paid. The records were corrected. The lies were exposed. The people responsible faced consequences. And the papers my mother had once pushed into my hands ended up exactly where they belonged. In the trash. I kept the house. But more importantly, I kept my right to decide what happened to my life. If this story stayed with you, remember one thing. Family should never require you to surrender your safety, your identity, or everything you built just to prove that you love them. Sometimes the most important sentence you can say is only one word.
No.
If you enjoyed this story about betrayal, hidden secrets, justice, and finding the courage to stand up for yourself, subscribe for more stories like this. Because sometimes the person asking you to sacrifice everything for family is the very person you need to stop trusting.